Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, January 6th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. The land beneath our feet has been sinking for decades.
Well, the Central Valley of California is the poster child for subsidence. There's nowhere else in the world that has subsided this much for as long.
Coming up, we'll hear from researchers at Stanford on whether they think this can be reversed. But first, today's headlines. Zoo officials in Oakland are continuing to treat a spider monkey that was discovered during a traffic stop in Madera County. The California Highway Patrol pulled over a Rolls-Royce last Monday on Highway 99 and found the female monkey, who was wearing a baby onesie, inside. Zoo officials told the LA Times over the weekend the monkey is suffering from malnourishment and a respiratory infection. The Rolls-Royce driver was arrested on suspicion of DUI, possession of cannabis for sale, and for having the monkey. California law prohibits owning primates as pets. Agricultural burning is now almost entirely banned in the San Joaquin Valley. The practice of burning ag waste was used by farmers for decades to get rid of prunings or orchards no longer in production. But it also produced harmful pollution that could affect the health of people living nearby. A ban on ag burning was first approved in 2003, but air quality officials pushed for a gradual phase-out to allow farmers and growers to come up with viable alternatives. Ag burning now will only be allowed with special permits. State water officials say more storms will be needed to keep water supplies strong for the year. An annual measurement last week showed snowpack in the Sierra Nevada is at 91% of average for this time of year. Officials say that's a solid start, but more snow is needed across the Sierra to beef up water supplies. Much of the snow has fallen in the northern part of the Sierra, while the southern half has remained largely dry. California will have more of a buffer starting this year when it comes to releasing people from state mental hospitals. As Cap Radio's Kate Wolf reports, the new law is in response to a violent crime.
San Francisco's Chinatown was rocked last spring when a 61-year-old man stabbed a worker at a bakery he'd been fixated on for years. The man had been released from a state mental hospital a week before after a judge agreed his mental health condition was under control. The man had been in prison for a previous violent offense. The bill's author, San Francisco Democrat Matt Haney, says officials didn't have enough time to prepare a plan for the man's release.
There is an incredible amount of work that needs to be done when we release somebody in this situation to ensure the safety of the community and the safety of the individual. Medication, housing, continued treatment. And 5 days simply is not enough.
The new law would allow hospitals to take up to 30 days to release someone. In Sacramento, I'm Kate Wolf.
The 119th Congress was sworn in on Friday, and Congressman-elect Adam Gray is now Congressman Adam Gray. Gray beat former Republican Representative John Duarte in a nail-biter election in November. The race was called for Gray with a margin of fewer than 200 votes. Gray's win flipped a crucial conservative seat in the narrow House of Representatives. Gray's a former state assembly member. Duarte had served just one term in Congress. Today, Congress is also set to certify President-elect Donald Trump's victory.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our main story. The fact that the ground in the Central Valley is sinking may not come as news to most Valley residents. Scientifically known as subsidence, the sinking phenomenon was first documented in the 1920s. Now, new research from Stanford University shows not only is land continuing to sink in the San Joaquin Valley, but it's happening at a record-breaking pace. Our producer, Jonathan Linden, recently spoke with Dr. Rosemary Knight and Dr. Matthew Lees, who recently released their research. Dr. Rosemary Knight first explained subsidence and how it's impacting our region.
Subsidence is the sinking of the ground surface, and that sinking in the Central Valley of California is due to compaction in the groundwater system. It's due to the fact that more water is being pulled out of the groundwater system than is going in. This results in a pressure drop within the aquifer itself and a compaction that shows up on the ground surface as subsidence. The kind of problem it causes is once you start getting subsidence on the ground surface, it can impact the aqueducts that are moving over the ground surface. It can change flood risk. Suddenly you've got areas subsided that weren't previously subsided when you did your flood risk planning or your flood risk management. And it can also cause other types of infrastructure to be damaged. It can damage wells, it could damage roads. So subsidence can have a large impact.
And Matthew, can you talk about specifically why you decided to study subsidence here in the Central Valley?
Well, the Central Valley of California is the poster child for subsidence. There's nowhere else in the world that has subsided this much for as long. So there's other places also experiencing the subsidence problem, but the Central Valley, it's the poster child for all of the problems and for the largest magnitude of subsidence anywhere in the world.
Now, Rosemary, your study now out from Stanford says subsidence has grown since 2006, but you also find that there are some solutions. Can you talk to us about what some of those solutions look like?
So subsidence has grown since 2006, primarily because we've had a series of droughts. There is still a need for the water to be available for irrigation to support agriculture in the valley. So the only solution with the droughts and a shortage of surface water is to pump groundwater. So we have a situation where much more water is coming out of the groundwater system than is going back in. The solution is to either reduce pumping or get more water back into the groundwater system. We've decided to figure out if we could solve this subsidence problem by getting more water back into the groundwater system, and that's a process referred to as recharge. So how can we recharge the groundwater system? How could we capture excess surface water during the rainy season or during the wet years and get that water back underground? And a solution would be if we could target the areas that are compacting and causing the subsidence and get sufficient water into those areas, we could actually stop the subsidence.
And Matthew, in your study with Rosemary, you both find that it wouldn't be feasible to try to solve subsidence at a valley-wide scale, correct?
That's right. Yeah, in this study, we took an assessment of the amount of available water that's likely to be there that could be recharged into the groundwater system. And what we actually found was that by chance, that amount is exactly the amount needed to stop the subsidence at the valley scale. So why do we not say this is feasible? Well, it's because there's all the other priorities for this recharge water. Subsidence is not the only hazard caused by groundwater extraction in the Central Valley. You have surface water depletion, you have shallow wells running dry, you have impacts to ecosystems. So realistically, we can't expect all of this water to be diverted to the subsidence problem. Instead, what we point towards is a targeted focus on the subsidence problem where the impacts are greatest. And that links back to what Rosemary was saying before about locations where there are aqueducts being damaged, where there are wells being damaged, where there are flood risks in which there were not flood risks before. So we're suggesting that we don't think it's feasible to stop subsidence everywhere, but it is realistic and sensible to focus efforts where the impacts are greatest.
Matthew, for a lot of people that live here in the Central Valley, subsidence isn't a new thing. It's something that's been talked about for a long time. What is significant about your study that you did with Rosemary? How is it different than other research that's been put out in the past?
The really significant finding from our study is highlighting the size and scale of this subsidence. And to be specific on that, what we did was we compared the amount of subsidence in the period from 2006 to present with that which occurred in the historic period, which broadly speaking refers to 1925 through to 1975. Now, this historic period as one of the greatest historic instances of subsidence anywhere in the world. What we showed in our study is that actually what's happened in the last 20 or so years has been equal in scale and magnitude to that which happened in the historic period. Before, we didn't know this. We knew it was subsiding very fast, but there'd always been an assumption that the historic period was the biggest in terms of subsidence amount. So the real finding that we made was that we've now reached this unenviable milestone of equaling the historic subsidence total.
And Rosemary, what's next in terms of your research into this issue? How do you hope this informs the public?
What we're working on right now is combining the maps we have of subsidence with the images of the subsurface we're able to generate with another geophysical method where we have a helicopter deployed system that can image to depths of 300 meters in the Central Valley and show where you have layers of sand and gravel, where you have layers of clay. And we have just released maps of the Central Valley showing where there's good pathways for recharge. We want to put water on the ground surface, not we, water agencies throughout the state are doing this, spreading water on the ground surface, wanting that water to then move down below the ground surface and reach these areas where subsidence is occurring. We can see pathways for recharge in these geophysical data sets, the airborne electromagnetic data sets that we have. So what's next in our research is helping people solve the problem by using a geophysical imaging method that allows us to see where these recharge paths are.
That was producer Jonathan Linden speaking with Dr. Rosemary Knight and Dr. Matthew Lees. They recently released new research through Stanford University that documents the record-breaking level of ground sinking in the Central Valley. And that does it for today's show. If you've got feedback or a story idea for Central Valley Daily, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
We could all use a little help navigating the news these days. The Consider This podcast wants to give you a hand. 6 days a week, we'll help you make sense of the day's biggest news story and what it means for you in less than 15 minutes. Listen now to the Consider This podcast from NPR.